From the outside, they looked identical. From the day they were born, everyone called them the triplets of Carolina, Nathan, Kyle, and Drew. Same round faces, same freckled cheeks, same green eyes that squinted when they laughed, but only one of them ever learned to hide behind that sameness. Only one learned that fitting in sometimes means disappearing. His name was Nathan. And while his brothers were praised for being real boys playing football, dating girls, driving trucks, Nathan memorized how to shrink himself in silence, how to avoid every question that might unravel him. It worked for a long time until the day the family photo had room for 2 grooms. But not for him. Nathan had grown up in a house where perfection was a Sunday suit and a straight smile. Their parents were deeply religious. Father was a deacon, mother ran the choir. There were always guests at dinner and always prayers before meatloaf. Everything had to be neat, matching, and God-fearing. Kyle and Drew fit easily. They dated cheerleaders, brought home report cards, and joked loudly with their dad on the porch. Nathan, though he was quieter. He stayed up late reading not just novels, but cookbooks, architecture, magazines, anything that offered a different kind of beauty than what was preached at home. He knew early on that he felt different. At first, it was just a small thing, a flutter in his chest when the music teacher touched his shoulder. But by middle school, he was writing secret notes to a boy named Elijah, folding them into his backpack like contraband. One of them got caught. It never made it home, but it made it to Drew's hands. Drew read it. He laughed, and then he said, "I won't tell. Just don't be weird around me." Nathan laughed back, but it was the kind of laugh that carved silence into bone. High school came and the roles hardened. Kyle was quarterback. Drew led the youth group. Nathan kept to the edges. His brothers went to prom with matching corsages for their dates. Nathan skipped it all together and spent that night in the shed out back, building a bookshelf he didn't need. He told himself he was just different, but difference in a family built on mirrors was a threat. After graduation, the 3 moved to different towns but stayed close. Text chains, family BBQs, Christmas mornings, or photo ops. Nathan played his part. He brought wine, he built gingerbread, houses. He said yes to everything except honesty. But then came the wedding, or rather, the weddings. Kyle and Drew, as if still twins in thought and spirit, decided to have a double ceremony. Twin grooms double. Love, their mother said with pride. The announcement came with gold-trimmed invitations and a note asking Nathan to be their best brother. It should have felt like an honor. Instead, it felt like a warning: play along or stay away. At that time, Nathan had been quietly living with Alex, his boyfriend, for almost 3 years. They'd met at a gallery in Asheville where Nathan had moved for work. Alex loved gardening and told stories with his hands. With him, Nathan felt fully seen, not just recognized. So when the wedding invitation arrived, Nathan made a decision. He replied with a handwritten note: "I'd be honored. And I'd like to bring my partner, Alex." The message was met with silence. Days passed, then a week, no one called. Not Kyle, not Drew, not even his parents, until finally an email arrived, not from his brothers, not from family, but from the event planner. "Dear Nathan, due to limited seating and the nature of this religious ceremony, we kindly ask that you attend alone or not at all. We appreciate your understanding." Understanding, Nathan stood in the middle of his kitchen, reading those words over and over, feeling them land like stones in his stomach. For a moment, he considered going anyway, alone, pretending it didn't matter. But the truth had already unwrapped itself, too far to be ignored. They weren't just leaving out Alex, they were erasing him. This was the moment Nathan realized something that would shape everything that came next. You can share a birthday, a home, even DNA, but still be treated like a guest in your own family. If you've ever been the one left out, the one who didn't match the frame, the one who had to choose between being invited or being real, this story is for you. Stay with us, because what Nathan did next changed more than his own life. Subscribe to HeartStories for more true stories of resilience, identity, and the quiet power of choosing yourself. Nathan didn't answer the planner's email. He didn't need to. The silence that followed said everything. He watched the calendar tick toward the wedding date, like a countdown to an absence that had already arrived. He didn't call his brothers. He didn't reach out to his parents. Instead, he sat with the ache, an ache he'd grown used to, one that had shaped him more than any sibling bond ever had. Alex noticed the shift. He always did. When Nathan became quieter over dinner, or when he rearranged the spice rack 3 times in one day, Alex would gently ask, "Want to talk about it?" But Nathan couldn't find the words. Because how do you explain to someone that you've been cut out of a family photo, You were never really in on the day of the wedding. Nathan and Alex drove to the Blue Ridge Mountains. They didn't speak much. Alex had packed a picnic, goat cheese, strawberries, homemade lemonade, and Nathan had brought his camera. It was their quiet act of rebellion. Instead of sitting in a pew and pretending to be accepted, they chose sky and silence in one another. At the peak, Alex laid out the blanket and opened the food. Nathan stared out over the valley and imagined the church his brothers were standing in. He pictured Kyle in a navy blue suit, Drew with their father's cufflinks. He imagined their wives, the vows, the applause, and then the photos, the ones that would hang in their parents' hallway for decades, the ones that would tell a story where he didn't exist. I should feel angry, Nathan said suddenly. His voice surprised even himself. But mostly, I just feel tired. Alex didn't say anything right away. He took Nathan's hand and held it gently, like it was something sacred. Then maybe it's time we start building something that gives energy back. That night, back at their cabin, Nathan sat at his desk and opened a blank journal. On the first page, he wrote one sentence: "If I can't be part of their table, I will build my own." It started small, just conversations mostly. Alex invited over a few friends, queer folks from the local bookstore, a non-binary baker who made lemon scones that melted hearts, a couple who ran a flower farm. They sat around the fire pit, swapped stories, shared wine. For the first time in his life, Nathan felt the kind of belonging that didn't require bending himself to fit. Word spread, people came, some stayed. Others just needed to be seen, to be heard, to know they weren't alone. They brought food, music books. Someone built a bench. Someone else painted a mural of wildflowers across the cabin's side wall. Nathan began to call it the table, even though it wasn't always a physical one. It was a space, a heartbeat, a gathering of people who refused to apologize for who they were. Months passed, Nathan and Alex grew stronger, not just as partners, but as anchors in a growing community. The pain of the wedding began to fade, not disappear, but transform. It became compost, something that fed the roots of something better. But grief has its seasons. One afternoon while cleaning the shed, Nathan found an old photo in a dusty box, him and his brothers, age 7, dressed like cowboys, arms slung over each other's shoulders. The kind of photo where everything looks perfect until you remember how much was missing under the surface. Nathan stared at it for a long time before putting it in a drawer. Face down, later that week, an envelope arrived. No return address, inside a glossy wedding photo, his parents. Kyle and Drew, their wives, a smiling pastor, neatly printed at the bottom. Love makes a family. The irony burned. There was no note, no explanation, just a snapshot of a world that had no room for him. Nathan didn't cry. He didn't tear the photo apart. He simply folded it, placed it in the fireplace, and watched the edges curl into smoke. That night, he told Alex, "Next spring, I want to marry you here, not because we need it to be official, but because I want to be surrounded by people who see me, not just stand beside me." Alex smiled, not surprised. "I've been waiting for you to say that." Nathan didn't care who came. He didn't care about traditions or rituals. What he wanted was truth. He wanted a moment that didn't require shrinking. He wanted a ceremony that honored the life he had built, not the one he had lost. As winter came, he and Alex began to prepare. They planted bulbs in the frozen earth. Tulips, daffodils, lilies. Seeds of a spring that hadn't arrived yet, but surely would. Nathan learned something then. There's power in starting again. Even when the ground is cold, he had lost his seat at their table, but in its place he was building something more honest, something rooted, something real. Spring arrived with quiet defiance. The mountains thawed, wildflowers crept through the earth like secrets refusing to stay buried. Nathan and Alex spent mornings building the arch themselves, carved from driftwood and wrapped in ivy, and evenings stringing soft lights through the trees. They weren't planning a wedding for show. They were building a moment, one that didn't ask for permission or approval. The guest list was small but full. Their friends from the community, queer couples who knew the sting of silence, a trans violinist who offered to play during the vows, and even a local pastor who'd been exiled from his church for marrying 2 men. There were no formal invitations. Just voice messages, potluck, sign-ups, and a promise. Come as you are. Nathan spent the night before the ceremony, alone on the porch. Alex was inside baking the lemon lavender cake they'd chosen together. The stars above were sharp and quiet, like witnesses waiting. Nathan held a photo in his hands. Not of his brothers, not of his parents, but of himself, taken months ago by Alex when Nathan hadn't noticed. He was laughing, eyes closed, hands messy with paint. It wasn't perfect, it was real. He slipped the photo into his coat pocket. That was the version of himself he was bringing into tomorrow. The ceremony was set for just before sunset. Guests began arriving in their own time. Someone brought wild honey, someone else brought homemade wine. The violinist tuned her strings as laughter bubbled around the fire pit. And at the center of it all stood two chairs, simple wooden and deliberately left empty. Nathan had placed them himself facing the altar just behind the guests. When asked, he only said, "They're for anyone brave enough to come." The moment arrived, the air smelled like soil and citrus. Nathan walked barefoot through the grass. Alex waiting beneath the arch, wearing a navy suit that shimmered slightly in the dusk. They didn't have bridesmaids or groomsmen, just presence, just truth. Their vows weren't scripted. They were whispered raw. Unrehearsed, I was taught to fear the sound of my own heart, Nathan said, his voice trembling. But you, Alex, you turned up the volume until I could hear myself again. Alex smiled through tears. You made me a home in the space between all the things I once thought I had to be. They kissed, and the small crowd rose in cheers. Somewhere in the trees, fireflies blinked alive. The violinist played. People danced barefoot on moss and leaves. It wasn't grand, but it was sacred. And then in the fading light, two figures appeared. They didn't speak at first. They just stood near the edge of the clearing. Hesitant, Kyle and Drew. They weren't dressed for a wedding. Jeans, button-downs, tired expressions, like they'd driven for hours, uncertain of what they'd find. Nathan saw them froze. Every cell in his body seemed to forget what to do. The music slowed, the guests quieted. Drew was the first to step forward. He looked older, smaller than Nathan remembered. We weren't invited, he said softly. Nathan didn't answer. He looked toward the two empty chairs, still waiting in silence. Kyle cleared his throat. We didn't come to ruin anything. We wanted to see you like this. Not how we were told to see you. Nathan swallowed hard. There was no dramatic hug, no public forgiveness, only a quiet nod toward the chairs. They sat later that evening as the fire burned low. Drew approached Nathan again. His voice was steadier now. I never told you, but when we were kids, I found that note you wrote to Elijah. I laughed because I didn't know how to admit it. Reminded me of something I'd written too. I never showed anyone. I buried it. Nathan looked at him, not with anger, but with the exhausted understanding of someone who's carried too many secrets too long. I'm not ready, Drew added, but I'm trying. Kyle didn't say much, just a quiet, you built something beautiful. Then he added, almost ashamed, I don't think I know how to do that. Not yet. Nathan placed a hand on his shoulder, not to fix anything, just to say you showed up. Sometimes forgiveness doesn't arrive in words. It arrives in presence, in sitting where no one expected you to come, in walking into a space you once refused to acknowledge, in choosing however late to witness someone in their truth. That night, as the last guest left and the stars returned, Nathan and Alex sat together on the porch. The two chairs still stood in the clearing, no longer empty, but never fully filled either. And maybe that was enough for now. In the weeks after the wedding, life returned to a quiet rhythm. The flowers from the ceremony wilted and dropped their petals into the soil. Alex dried a few in wax paper. Nathan boxed up the decorations but left the arch standing in the field. He called it a reminder. Not of the wedding, but of the fact that something once denied could be built by hand. The chairs remained too. Weather-worn, slightly tilted, but still there. Kyle and Drew hadn't called. Not even a text. They had shown up, sat down, and left without another word. And for a while, Nathan told himself that was enough. He had let them in. He had opened the door. Whatever happened next wasn't his burden to carry. But then one Saturday morning, the package arrived. No name, no note, just a box wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a photo frame, 3 small boys in matching overalls, mud-stained and grinning on a tire swing. Nathan knew the photo well. It used to hang in the upstairs hallway of their childhood home. He turned it over. On the back, scribbled in uneven penmanship, I remember when we still knew how to hold each other. Nathan didn't know what to feel. Was it a peace offering, a confession, a cry for help? He didn't respond. He couldn't, because something deeper had begun to unravel. Something that went beyond his brother's silence or presence. It was a grief Nathan hadn't prepared for, the grief of seeing them struggle with their own truths. Not because he resented them, but because he recognized the look in their eyes that night, the same quiet panic he had once carried alone. A week later, Drew called. Not texted, called Nathan, let it ring once, twice, then picked up. Drew's voice was low, almost unfamiliar. I didn't think you'd answer. I didn't think you'd call. A pause. I've been waking up at 3 a.m. every night. My wife thinks I have insomnia. I think I'm having a breakdown. Nathan didn't laugh. He didn't comfort. He waited. I went to therapy. Drew continued. One session. The guy asked why I came. I told him I watched my brother marry the love of his life, and I felt envy instead of judgment, and that terrified me. Nathan closed his eyes. He imagined Drew sitting in his car after the wedding, gripping the wheel too tightly, not because of traffic, but because something in his bones had shifted. Does Kyle know? Nathan asked. No, but I think he's dealing with his own storm. They didn't say much after that, but it was enough. Drew had named it, and in doing so, he'd opened a crack in the wall. A few days later, Kyle emailed Nathan a photo of their father's church bulletin. The headline read, Upcoming Sermon, The Dangers of Modern Family Values. No message attached, just the photo. Nathan stared at the screen. He wasn't surprised. Their father had always used the pulpit as armor. His sermons more about fear than faith. Still seeing it printed like that, as if Nathan's wedding had been a warning, not a celebration, struck a wound that hadn't quite healed. But that night, something else happened, Tio called. His voice was steadier than Drew's, but only on the surface. I went to Dad's sermon, he said. I sat in the third row like always, and I listened to him say that families are falling apart because of unnatural unions. Nathan said nothing. Kyle's voice cracked. I looked around and everyone was nodding, amening, like they hadn't just seen their son marry in the most honest, beautiful way possible. Nathan finally spoke. They weren't looking at you. They were looking at a mirror they'd been taught to hate. There was silence on the line. Then Kyle said something Nathan would carry for the rest of his life. You showed me that truth doesn't have to be loud. It just has to last longer than the lie they didn't reconcile. Not in the dramatic movie scene way. There was no family dinner, no apology from their father, no mother calling in tears, but something shifted. A new thread was pulled. A truth named a chair once empty, now filled by a brother who still didn't know all the words, but who was finally brave enough to sit down and listen. Nathan and Alex continued their lives, not as survivors, not even as symbols, but as two men who had chosen love without condition. And somewhere out there, two brothers were learning how to choose something other than what they were taught to be. Because sometimes healing doesn't begin with forgiveness, it begins with being witnessed. Autumn returned with gold-stained leaves and cooler winds brushing through the hills. The arch in the garden had begun to weather its wood, curling gently at the edges. Ivy weaving through its frame like memory, refusing to fade. Nathan never took it down. He let it stand like a scar turned sacred. It had been nearly a year since the wedding, since two chairs waited and two brothers came, since conversations began that had once felt impossible. Kyle had started therapy. Drew had moved into a small apartment downtown alone. Their marriages hadn't survived the truce that followed, but neither had their shame. Nathan didn't ask for details. He didn't need to. Sometimes the collapse of old things is the first sign that something honest might be born. What surprised Nathan most wasn't their slow return. It was his own shift, the way his identity no longer felt like a protest or a wound. It just was whole, unapologetic, lived. He had started something small, a nonprofit art program for LGBTQ+ youth in the region. They met once a week at the cabin, they painted, wrote poetry, cooked together. Some had been kicked out, some had never come out. But each of them, in their own way, had been told they didn't belong. Nathan called the space the table. It was no longer just metaphor. It was a real hand-built table beneath the trees surrounded by mismatched chairs. On the surface were carvings, names, initials, short quotes, a living document of survival and creation, of truth spoken aloud. One afternoon during a session, a boy named Mateo, 16 slight, sharp-eyed, asked, "Were you ever scared they'd never accept you?" Nathan smiled, not from comfort, but from understanding I was terrified. But I learned that being seen is more important than being accepted by people who refuse to look. Mateo nodded. "But what if they're your blood?" Nathan answered gently. "Then you build something strong enough for them to find if they ever decide to come home. And if they don't, you still have a home." That night, Nathan sat alone by the fire. The cabin was quiet. Alex was away visiting his mother, and the silence, once heavy, now felt like breath. He pulled out the old photo, the three boys on the tire swing. This time he didn't put it away. He set it on the table beside a small envelope with a note from Drew. Not all family is lost. Some of us just take longer to find the map. Later that week, an unexpected email arrived from his mother. Your father's health is declining. I know we haven't spoken. I know you have every reason not to reply, but I thought you should know. Nathan stared at the screen. For a moment, the boy inside him stirred, the one who had begged for recognition for just a glance of pride. But he also knew something deeper now, that returning doesn't always mean shrinking. He replied, "Thank you for telling me. I wish him peace. I have found mine." He didn't go back, not because he was bitter, but because he finally understood that not every door needs to be reopened for healing to take place. The next month, HeartStories reached out. They'd heard about the table about the boys painting beneath trees and the man who built a life from the silence he once lived in. They wanted to feature his story. Nathan agreed, not for attention, but because somewhere out there, another person like Mateo was waiting. And maybe they didn't know it yet, but there was a chair waiting for them too. The episode aired, messages flooded in. Strangers, families, teachers, even a pastor who had left his church after his daughter came out. And then one letter handwritten, no return address, inside a photograph. The three of them, Nathan, Kyle, Drew, grown men now, arms around each other, standing in front of the table, below a single line. "This time we saved you a seat," Nathan smiled, framed the photo. Hung it in the hallway of the cabin, just above the bookshelf he'd built, instead of going to prom. The boy who once stood alone with silent truths had become the man who built a legacy from them. Not everyone stayed. Not everyone apologized, but that no longer mattered. Because Nathan had done what generations before him never dared to do. He told the truth. He stayed and he kept the chair open. If you've ever felt like the one left out of the family photo, follow HeartStories. Because sometimes the greatest legacy you leave is the one you build when no one else shows up.